she wore an Apple Watch to dinner that night. A black silicone band glowing faintly against her tanned wrist in the last known photograph of her alive. The picture was taken at 6:34 in the evening on April 4th, 2026. Roughly an hour later, according to her husband, she fell out of an 8-foot dinghy into the Sea of Abaco. 20-knot winds, fading light, a 4-mile stretch of clear, shallow Bahamian water. She vanished into it, and she has never been seen again. But here is what nobody has been able to explain. That Apple Watch, the one strapped to her wrist as the sun went down, somehow ended up back on board their sailboat.
The boat she never reached. The boat she was supposedly trying to swim to when she disappeared.
Today we are going to walk through this entire case, from the love story to the silence. We are going to look at a timeline that local bartenders say is mathematically impossible. We are going to step inside a 25-year marriage that neighbors describe as a war zone behind closed doors. We are going to trace the exact route a charter captain with 15 years on these waters says could not take 8 hours. And we are going to ask the question federal investigators are reportedly asking right now.
How does a watch come home when its owner does not?
Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This case is moving fast, and we will be back the moment new information surfaces. Now the legal piece, because it matters more than any other line in this video. As of this recording, no one has been charged with a crime in connection with the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. Her husband was detained by Bahamian police for 5 days in April of 2026. He was released without charges after prosecutors declined to file within the statutory window. He has, through his attorney, categorically denied any wrongdoing in this case. Bahamian police have stated publicly that he remains a suspect in an active investigation. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, or CGIS, has opened a separate criminal investigation. But a suspect is not a defendant, and a suspect is not guilty. We are not lawyers, we are not judges, and we are not jurors. We work in facts, public records, and questions, and asking questions is the entire job of a channel like this. Where something is alleged, we will say so out loud. Where something is confirmed by reporting, we will name the source. With that out of the way, let us tell you who Lynette was before she became a headline.
Her name was Lynette Ruth Hooker, and she was 55 years old when she disappeared. A mother, a daughter, a sailor, a photographer, a friend, a wife. A woman whose social media bio simply read, photographer and sailor living my best life. She was originally from Onsted, Michigan, a small town in Lenawee County in the southeast corner of the state. The kind of place where lake roads curve through the Irish hills and everybody knows their neighbor's car by sound. She lived for years in a brick bungalow along a narrow asphalt road that wound down to Sand Lake. But for the last several years, Lynette had been living a life that most people only dream about. She and her husband had sold most of what they owned and bought a 46-foot sailboat in Rockport, Texas. They named it Soulmate. They pushed off into the Gulf of Mexico and built a life on the water that almost never came back to land. They called themselves the Sailing Hookers on social media, and they posted constantly. Their feeds were a love letter to the ocean, to the islands, to the version of marriage they wanted the world to see.
In video after video on her Instagram account, Lynette is the one who looks alive. She is the one cooking lunch in a solar oven on deck, laughing at the smoke curling up around her face. She is the one snorkeling eye to eye with a sea turtle in glass-clear water, narrating in a happy whisper. She is the one filming sunsets from the bow, calling the ocean her happy place out loud, on camera, again and again. In nearly every clip, just within reach of the camera, sits her husband of about 25 years. sunburnt, smiling, part of the rhythm she captured. To anyone scrolling past those posts, it looked like a love story set adrift on a perfect horizon. Two people choosing each other year after year against an endless blue. On March 29th of 2026, about a week before she disappeared, she posted a short clip of dark skies and choppy water. She captioned it, "Here we are at Marsh Harbor. The Sea of Abaco is very entertaining." Then she joked that they would have some fun if it would stop raining. Her final public post, made just days before the night that changed everything, showed boats anchored in calm water under a blue sky. The caption was 4 words long. Not going anywhere for a while.
That post is still up. The comment section is still active. Strangers are still leaving messages on it, like flowers on a doorstep. Friends she has not spoken to in years are tagging her, asking her to please come home. The internet has a way of preserving the last frame of someone's life in a frame they did not choose.
Lynette had family she stayed close to, every day, by phone and by text. She had a daughter from an earlier chapter of her life, a young woman named Carly Aylesworth. The two of them spoke constantly, sometimes several times a day. Carly has told reporters that her mother was a text away, every day, for years. Lynette also had a mother, Darlene Hamlet, who split her time between Florida and Michigan and often lived with the couple. She had close friends, including a woman named Rachel Shaw, who would later speak publicly in her defense and against the husband's account. She had a retirement plan, a paid-off boat, and decades of life still ahead of her. She had the kind of online presence that ages well, the kind that gets quoted in a eulogy and shared at a memorial. What she also had, according to the people who knew her best, was a marriage that did not match the pictures.
Behind the sunsets, there were storms the camera never caught. Behind the dance reels, there were nights neighbors say they could hear from across the road. Behind the smiling captions, there was a history her own family is now asking the world to look at very carefully.
We will get to all of it, in the order the evidence comes in. But first, let us go to the night everything stopped. Saturday, April 4th, 2026, Easter weekend. The Bahamas in early April is exactly what the postcards promise. Warm, breezy, and lit up at sunset like somebody turned a dial on the sky and forgot to turn it down. Lynette and her husband had been at the Abaco Inn since the previous afternoon. The Abaco Inn is a small hotel and restaurant on Elbow Key, an island known locally for a red and white striped lighthouse. The harbor on Elbow Key is small, protected, and lined with pastel houses that look like they were painted by hand. According to a bartender there named Ken, the couple arrived on April 3rd at around 4:30 in the afternoon. Lynette walked straight down to the pool area. Her husband walked straight to the bar to order drinks. Ken, who has worked at the Abaco Inn for years, poured them rum and cokes for about 2.5 hours that evening. He later told the New York Post that he never actually saw Lynette in person during the visit. He only saw the husband, ordering for 2. He said the husband thanked him for the prompt service amid a busy night. The next afternoon, April 4th, the couple came back to the same inn. They had dinner and drinks at the Abaco Inn again, this time staying longer. New photos that have since surfaced from that day show Lynette in motion, alive, wearing that Apple Watch. The timestamp on one of those photos is 6:34 in the evening. At about 7:30, they got into their 8-foot hard-bottomed dinghy at the dock. The dinghy was small, open-topped, with a single outboard engine on the back. They were headed back to the Soulmate, anchored a few miles away in a popular anchorage near Aunt Pat's Bay. The route between those 2 points is one of the most heavily trafficked channels in the entire Abacos. The water in that channel is shallow, often only 4 to 10 feet deep, depending on the tide. It is clear enough that, in daylight, you can see stingrays and sea turtles drifting past the sand. At night, it is dark, yes, but it is not open ocean. It is a protected stretch of water, ringed by islands, dotted with anchored yachts and moored sailboats. You are almost never out of sight of land. What happened in that dinghy over the next 90 minutes is the entire case. And the only person who has told that story in any detail is the one person who came back from the trip.
So we have to weigh what he says against what the witnesses heard, against what the water itself is telling investigators right now.
Here is the official account, pieced together from his statements to Bahamian police and his interviews with ABC News and CBS News. It is also drawn from a phone call he made to a friend that was later obtained by reporters. He says the sun was setting as they pulled away from the dock. He says a sudden gust of wind hit them, somewhere around 20 knots. He says his wife, in his exact words on a recorded call, basically just bounced off the dinghy in the middle of a little blow. He says they were not wearing life jackets that night. He says the dinghy key went into the water with her because it was not clipped to anything or anybody. He says she had the spare dinghy key in her dry bag, and the dry bag was with her too. He says the engine cut out the moment the key went over the side. He says the wind blew the dinghy one way and his wife the other, immediately and dramatically. He says he threw her a flotation device as quickly as he could. He says he lost an oar in the chaos. He says he yelled out to her as the wind carried them apart. He says he dropped anchor to stop the drift and kept yelling. He says the last thing he saw was his wife swimming back toward Hopetown with a yellow dry bag visible on her body. He says the yacht was about 1,000 yards away from where she went over. He says he then drifted, alone, in the dark for the next 8 hours. He says he fired 2 emergency flares from the disabled dinghy. He says one boat passed and did not respond to the flare. He says another boat passed and did not respond to the second flare either. He says he eventually washed up on a rocky beach at the Marsh Harbor boatyards at around 4 in the morning. He says he stumbled onto the property, exhausted and thirsty, calling out about a key and a woman. An employee named Edward Smith was the first person he spoke to on land. Smith would later describe him as wrung out and clearly in distress. Smith would also describe a small detail that has bothered people in the case ever since. He said the husband told him his wife was last seen swimming with a yellow bag on her person. And then he noticed that the husband himself was wearing a yellow bag when he washed ashore.
One yellow bag, 2 stories. Or one yellow bag and one missing wife. You decide which version asks fewer questions.
Smith was the one who called the police. Officers arrived around 5 in the morning. By sunrise on April 5th, an alert had gone out across the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. By that afternoon, divers, drones, and a Coast Guard helicopter were combing the Sea of Abaco. They found, in the shoreline searches over the next 48 hours, a single flotation device. They never found Lynette. Within 48 hours, the operation quietly downgraded from a rescue mission to a recovery one. In plain English, the searchers had stopped looking for a swimmer and started looking for a body. And that is the moment this story stops being a tragedy and starts becoming an investigation. Because while the search was still going on, his story began to attract scrutiny from people who knew Lynette personally. Not from reporters, at least not at first. From the people who loved her. Her daughter got a phone call the morning after the disappearance. She told the Today Show that the voice on the other end sounded monotone and relaxed. A stepfather telling a stepdaughter that her mother might be dead at sea.
A daughter knows her mother's husband by the rhythm of his voice. A daughter knows what panic sounds like and what it does not sound like. That phone call is one of the first things she told investigators about.
Within hours, Carly Aylesworth was on the record with multiple national outlets. She told Fox News that she did not believe the official account she had been given. She told NBC News, I feel like this was probably pre-planned, if anything. Like, it does not seem like just some accident. She told Dateline that she just wanted to know the truth, whatever the truth was. And she said something that, once it landed in print, completely changed the temperature of this case. She said her stepfather had threatened, roughly 2 years earlier, to throw her mother overboard. She said he had said no one would ever find her body. She said her mother had told her about that threat directly, after the fight that produced it. She said her mother had left him after that incident, but eventually went back, and the fighting persisted. She also said her stepfather had previously choked her mother during an argument. The husband, through his attorney, categorically and unequivocally denied her allegations in a statement to NBC News. But Carly was not the only one talking. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, who had lived with the couple part of the year, spoke to a Toledo station from Michigan. She said the police arresting him was, in her words, spot on. She said her son-in-law had abused her daughter physically and emotionally for years. She said the couple had separated several times across their 25-year marriage. The most recent separation, she said, had been about 1.5 years before Lynette disappeared. Then the neighbors started talking, and they did not hold back. A woman who lived directly across the street from the couple in Onstead spoke to the Detroit News. She said the marriage was turbulent, with a long history of fighting that the whole street could hear. She said, in her own words, the violence was pretty bad, and the arguments were almost weekly. She said she was not shocked when she heard the news of Lynette's disappearance. Another neighbor couple, an older husband and wife who lived just across the way, told reporters they were saddened, but not surprised either. The picture forming in real time in the press was the opposite of the social media feed. The Instagram showed laughter on a sailboat. The neighbors described a war zone in a brick bungalow.
And this is where every domestic violence case turns. Because the public usually only ever sees one side of a marriage, the side the couple chooses to post. The other side lives in 911 logs, in police reports, in hospital photos, and in the memory of the people next door who could not unhear it.
The court records in this case do exist, and they are public. In 2015, the couple were both involved in a Michigan police report in Kentwood. They accused each other of assault during a domestic dispute. A warrant was denied for insufficient evidence as to who started the fight. In 2006, the husband was acquitted by a Michigan jury of a child abuse charge in the same county. It means the state could not prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors on that specific day. But it does establish something investigators always look for in cases like this: a pattern of conflict documented across decades in multiple jurisdictions from multiple independent sources. Daughter, mother, neighbors, court files, friends, all telling roughly the same story. The pattern is the point. Now let us go back to the water, because the water has its own story to tell, and it is louder than anything the lawyers are saying. By April 7th, 3 days after Lynette vanished, Bahamian police had taken her husband in for questioning at Marsh Harbor. By April 8th, he was officially detained as a person of interest in her disappearance. Under Bahamian law, police can hold someone for up to 48 hours without filing charges. That window was extended in his case by another 72 hours, citing special circumstances tied to the investigation. He was eventually transported from Marsh Harbor all the way to a Freeport jail on a different Bahamian island for the questioning to continue. On April 13th, after roughly 5 days in custody, he walked out of the Central Police Station in Freeport, a free man. Prosecutors had recommended that no charges be filed at this time, pending further investigation. The Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner, Shanta Knowles, made the situation crystal clear to NBC News right after the release. He told the network that the husband would remain a suspect in an active and ongoing investigation. It was a clock that had simply run out for the moment. The day after his release, on April 14th, he sat down for an interview with ABC News. He told the network that his sole focus was to stay in the Bahamas and find his wife. He said he would go back to the boat and hire or beg people to help him search the surrounding waters and shorelines. He said he was not capable of just turning away from her, no matter how unlikely a recovery might be. Within hours of that interview airing, he left the Bahamas on a flight back to the United States. His attorney, Terrell Butler, told NBC News he had flown back to be with his terminally ill mother. She declined to disclose exactly where in the country he had gone, citing privacy and ongoing investigation concerns. The Soulmate sat at anchor in Marsh Harbor, empty, watched by Bahamian police and local boaters who knew the story. For the next several weeks, very little new information came out publicly from any official source. The search downgraded again, this time to a passive monitoring posture. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force said operations were still technically active, but they stopped issuing daily updates. Lynette's body did not surface in any of the predicted drift zones. And then, in early May of 2026, the investigation took a sharp turn that nobody outside law enforcement saw coming. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Service announced publicly that it was running its own criminal investigation. It was running in parallel with the Bahamian probe on its own authority. Then it did something unusual for a federal agency in the middle of a homicide-adjacent case. It asked for the public's help. In a statement released through social media and a tip line, CGIS said it was looking for the owner of a specific sailboat. That sailboat had been moored near the Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay on April 4th, the day Lynette disappeared. The agency posted 2 clear photographs of the unidentified vessel and asked anyone who knew the owners or occupants to come forward immediately. The implication of that public appeal was massive. Federal investigators were no longer just looking at the dinghy route from the Abaco Inn to the yacht. They were looking at potential witnesses near the Soulmate itself. People who might have seen or heard what happened on or near the yacht during the hours the dinghy was supposedly drifting helplessly.
Witnesses change everything in a case like this. In a case with no body, no charges, and no confession, a witness is the spine of any future prosecution. The Coast Guard does not put out a public appeal for witnesses unless it has strong reason to believe there are witnesses still to be found. They had already canvassed the obvious people during the first wave of interviews. This appeal was the second wave, the one that goes wider.
Around the same time, sources close to the investigation told CBS News, ABC News, and News Nation that the Soulmate itself had been seized. It had been sailed by a third party from the Bahamas back toward Florida, under arrangements that have not been fully disclosed. Roughly 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Coast Guard agents intercepted the vessel and took custody of it on the open water. By May 11th, photographs surfaced showing the Soulmate moored at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida. The yacht that Lynette had called her floating home was now formal evidence in a federal criminal investigation. The agency has refused to say publicly what kind of testing it is conducting, citing the active nature of the probe. But forensic specialists, speaking on the record to multiple national outlets, have been blunt about what they expect investigators to look for. They believe investigators are looking for blood and trace biological evidence. They believe investigators are looking for signs of struggle, broken fixtures, and displaced items. Anything inconsistent with a calm departure on April 4th is on the table. They believe investigators are looking at every surface in the cabin and on deck. Any place where DNA, fibers, or biological residue might still be detectable is being examined. They have also flagged a significant concern that the family has been raising for weeks. More than a month passed between the night Lynette vanished and the day the Soulmate was finally seized. In the words of one specialist on Fox News, the more time trickles through the hourglass, the more evidence becomes degraded and compromised. In a boat exposed to sun, salt air, humidity, rain, and human traffic for over 30 days, that warning is not minor. It is one of the central problems with this entire case. And it is one of several details that have viewers, analysts, and Lynette's own family asking the same hard question. Why did it take so long to take the boat into custody?
Why was the soulmate not seized on April 5th, the day she was reported missing? Why was it not seized on April 8th, when her husband was first detained for questioning? Why was it not seized before he was released, before he left the Bahamas, before evidence had time to disappear? The family has asked these questions on camera, more than once. The answers have been technical and slow in coming.
Those questions belong to the world of jurisdiction, and jurisdiction in this case is genuinely complicated. The Bahamas is a sovereign country with its own laws, its own courts, and its own police powers. American agencies cannot just walk into a Bahamian marina and impound private property registered to United States citizens. The soulmate had to leave Bahamian territorial waters first, on its own authority, before any United States agency could act. Once the boat crossed into international waters and approached the United States exclusive economic zone, federal authority kicked in. That is the legal mechanics of how a seizure like this happens this late after the fact. But to the people who loved Lynette, the mechanics are cold comfort, wrapped in bureaucratic language. Her daughter has said on camera more than once that every passing week is another week of evidence being lost to time and weather. Now, let us pull back and break down the 5 places where the official account, in the view of analysts, has started to come apart at the seams. We are going to take them one at a time, in the order they have been raised publicly. The first crack in the story is the Apple Watch. In a photograph from earlier on April 4th, taken at the Abaco Inn, Lynette is clearly wearing it. Black silicone band on her left wrist, time-stamped at 6:34 in the evening. That watch was on her body, in public view, on the dock area, about an hour before the alleged accident in the dinghy. According to a national true crime podcast that has broken several details in this case, that watch was later found back on the soulmate. Pause on that detail for a second and let it land. If she fell off the dinghy a half-mile from the yacht, in 20-knot winds, in fading light, the watch should have gone with her into the water. It was strapped to her wrist by all available evidence. It was visible at 6:34 in the evening on her left arm. She allegedly went over the side at around 7:30. Yet it shows up later on the very boat she never reached on the return trip. There are exactly 2 innocent explanations for that. 1. She removed the watch before getting in the dinghy, left it on the yacht earlier, and the photo was from an earlier moment that day. 2. Somebody is mistaken about which watch is which, or about when the photograph was actually taken. There is also one non-innocent explanation: that she was back on the soulmate at some point after the photograph at the Abaco Inn was taken. That something happened on that yacht. That somebody else moved that watch off her body and left it behind. Investigators have not stated publicly which explanation they are pursuing right now. But you do not seize a 46-foot sailboat for full forensic examination because you think the first explanation is the right one.
An Apple Watch knows where it has been at every minute of every day. It logs heart rate, motion, location, timestamps, and falls, and it transmits some of that data continuously. It is, in a forensic sense, a tiny silent witness on a tan wrist, recording every step until the moment something stops it. If federal investigators have that watch in evidence right now, they have a story that can be checked against the husband's story. 2 different accounts of the same final hour. Only one of them can be right.
The second crack in the story is the 8-hour drift. A charter captain named Mo Monestime has 15 years of experience operating in the exact waters of Great Abaco Island. He retraced the dinghy route on camera for Fox News Digital. He started where the couple started, at the small harbor across from the Abaco Inn dock. He followed the same southwestern turn between the western coast of Elbow Key and the eastern coast of Lubber's Quarters. He measured the route, both in his head and on his instruments, at about 4 miles from start to finish. He pointed out that the channel was shallow, often 4 feet at low tide, and rising only to about 10 feet at high tide. He pointed out that the bottom was visible from the surface in daylight, that he could see stingrays, that he could see sea turtles. He gave one sentence that should be played in every newsroom covering this case from this point forward. Not being found, that is the mystery. He said it is very hard to disappear in those waters because you are so close to land at every point along the route. The bartender at the Abaco Inn, Ken, who knows the local water personally as a longtime resident, was even more direct in his interview. He told the New York Post that the distance was only 4 miles, that it should not have taken 8 to 10 hours to reach shore. He said even if the dinghy was only floating with the current, the trip should have been much faster than what the husband described. In his words, the timeline of her disappearance in local waters simply does not add up. Think about what 8 hours of drifting actually means in a place like this. You are not in the open Atlantic Ocean. You are inside a busy channel of moored boats, anchored yachts, navigation lights, and lit homes on the shorelines of multiple keys. You are within sight of a lighthouse that has been guiding boats safely through these waters since the 19th century. You allegedly fire 2 flares, the brightest emergency signal that a small recreational vessel carries on board. 2 separate boats see them in the dark. Neither responds. Neither slows, neither investigates. And you continue drifting for hours, in roughly 20-knot winds, until you happen to come ashore at 4 in the morning at the boatyard. You will hear different reactions to this from different audiences who follow boating cases. Some viewers will note that boats in the Caribbean sometimes fail to respond to flares, especially if those flares are far off. That is technically true. Others will point out that a man in genuine distress would have anchored sooner and signaled the yacht with a flashlight. The husband says he tried to do most of those things in some version. But the math on its face is the math nobody can move around. The third crack in the story is the keys to the dinghy engine. According to the husband's statement to Bahamian police, the engine died because the ignition key went into the water with his wife. He has given slightly different versions of this detail to different parties over the weeks. In one telling, the key was in her pocket as she went over. In another, the key was clipped to her, and it was not clipped to anybody else because it was not on a tether. In yet another version, the spare key was in her dry bag, which also went with her into the water and away with the current. Her daughter has flatly contradicted the underlying premise of that entire mechanical explanation. She has told News Nation on camera that her mother never actually drove the dinghy on any of their trips together. In her words, it was always Brian at the helm. If that is accurate, the entire mechanical premise of the engine cutting out begins to wobble. A Coast Guard investigation will determine whether it is. Because the keys would not have been on the passenger of the boat. They would have been with the person at the helm, on a tether or in a pocket within reach. The husband is the one who has consistently been described as the driver of the boat in their own social media content over the years. The dinghy was something he piloted, the way some couples assign one person to the wheel and the other to the cooler. So how exactly did the keys end up with the passenger on the one trip when something went catastrophically wrong?
You do not hand a non-driver your only ignition key on a moving boat. You especially do not do it at sunset, in a wind that is supposedly already picking up dangerously. You especially do not do it knowing one cut to the engine will leave you stranded for hours, alone, with your wife in the water. The detail collapses under its own weight.
The fourth crack in the story is behavior, and it is the longest stretch of evidence in the entire case. We have already talked briefly about the monotone voicemail to the stepdaughter on the morning after. We have already talked about the abrupt departure from the Bahamas hours after a televised promise to stay and search. But there is more inside that same pattern of behavior, layered across days and interviews. A friend named Blaine Stevenson told Fox News he remained on the Soulmate for roughly 24 hours after his wife vanished. In that critical first day, according to this friend, he never really sat down with the situation in any meaningful way. He never gave anyone new details about what had happened, even though by then he was no longer reasonably in shock. Stevenson would later send him a written message after his return to the United States. He shared the contents of that message with CBS News in a recorded interview. The message read, in part, "They trusted you with their loved one, and you did not live up to it." Another important behavior detail, raised in viewer comments on coverage of this case, has to do with the words he chose in public. When asked by a reporter about the search, he reportedly said, "My one job was to look out for her, and that has not happened." Listen to the word "that" in that sentence, and the way it carries the weight. He did not say, "I did not do that." He said, "That has not happened." Linguists who study guilt-driven distancing in interviews call that kind of construction depersonalization, or agency removal. The speaker turns himself into a passive observer of his own life and his own choices. But it is a verbal tic that experienced interrogators are trained to listen for in interviews like this. When asked if he had a message for those who did not believe his account, he reportedly said, "I have no message for them." The fifth crack in the story is the smallest one, and it might be the loudest one of all. In the same recorded phone call he made to a friend on April 7th, he described his wife's fall from the dinghy using one specific word. He said she basically just bounced off the dinghy. Off an 8-foot dinghy, in 20-knot winds, with the boat moving in a channel he had piloted dozens of times. Bounced is the word a person reaches for when they are trying to make something sound like an accident. An accident the speaker had nothing to do with and could not have prevented. An accident that simply happened, like a ball off a wall in a video game.
People do not bounce off boats. They are knocked. They fall. They are pushed. They jump. They are thrown. But they do not, on their own, simply bounce. The word is not in the vocabulary of grief, and it is not in the vocabulary of accuracy.
So that is the picture as it stands at the moment of this recording. An Apple Watch that came home without its owner. A 4-mile route that supposedly took 8 hours to drift in a busy channel. A key that should have been in the driver's hand, not the passenger's pocket. A pattern of behavior in the hours and days after that does not look like grief to anyone who knew them. And a word choice on a recorded call that has not aged well under examination. None of those by themselves prove a crime in a court of law. Together, they are the reason the Coast Guard is now combing through a yacht in Fort Pierce, instead of letting the story end quietly at sea.
To understand who Lynette really was, you have to look past the case file and back into the rhythm of her actual life. She kept a daily routine on that boat that her friends say almost never varied, no matter what country they were anchored off of that week. She woke up early, before the sun finished climbing over the horizon line. She made coffee in a small French press she had carried from kitchen to kitchen for over a decade. She sat with it on the bow of the Soulmate, watching the water turn from grey to silver to blue. She texted her daughter every morning almost without fail just to say good morning and check in. She texted her mother before noon, every day, with a photograph of wherever they happened to be anchored that morning. She kept a private journal that her family has not yet released to the public and may never release. Friends describe her as the planner of every adventure they ever took with her. She was the one with the spreadsheet, the one with the laminated map, the one who remembered every island name and every mooring ball prize. She loved to dance, especially in the small galley kitchen of the soulmate when she was cooking dinner. She loved music from the 1990s, songs like the one she chose for her final dance reel on social media. She loved animals, especially the sea turtles that drifted near the boat in the Bahamas almost every morning. She loved her daughter, fiercely, with the kind of love that texts every single day without fail or excuse. She loved her mother the same way. She loved the life she had built on the water, and she was not, by anyone's account, ready to leave it. The last public photograph of her at the Abaco Inn that afternoon shows her smiling at something just off camera. The Apple Watch is visible on her wrist, exactly as you would expect it to be. Her hair is slightly tangled from the wind on the dock. She is 55 years old and she looks 20 years younger in the light. She does not look like a woman who is about to disappear from the earth forever in less than 90 minutes. She looks like a woman in the middle of her best year. That is the photograph her family wants you to remember. Not the headline. Not the boat. Not the missing person poster. The afternoon. The smile. The watch on her wrist. In the days after she vanished, her daughter Carly described what it actually felt like to wait for news in a hotel room in the Bahamas. She said the silence was the hardest part of every hour. No body, no confession, no closure, just the sound of the ocean she had loved her whole life. Carly sat on the bow of the Soulmate, where her mother had sat every morning with that French press, and she talked to her out loud. She said, "Mom, I am here. Wherever you are, I just want to talk to you and see you again." The interview where she said those words is hard to watch even now, weeks later. It is also the moment this case stopped being a news story and became a portrait of grief. Lynette's friends have flown in from across the country to be with the family. They have started a private group chat that they say almost never goes silent. They share old photos in it, old jokes, old voice memos that Lynette had sent them across the years. They are, in their own way, refusing to let her become past tense. Her mother, Darlene, has been the loudest voice in public because she says somebody has to be. She does interviews even when her voice is hoarse from doing the last one. She mails packets of documents to the Coast Guard and to reporters and to anybody who will look at them. She does this because she does not know how else to mother a daughter who is not there to be mothered anymore.
The community in Onstead has been doing its own quiet version of mourning, in the way small Midwestern towns tend to do. There is a small ribbon-tying campaign along the lake roads where the couple used to live. Local restaurants have donation jars on the counter for the family's legal fund and travel costs. The high school where Carly once attended has held a candlelight vigil that drew several hundred people on a Tuesday night in late April. Lenawee County put out a statement asking residents to send any photos or videos of the couple from the past several years to local authorities. Old neighbors have come forward with old memories they had not thought about in years. The picture being built between the official investigation and the community grief is of a woman whose absence is bigger than her hometown. Lynette had a future that was stolen from her, if the worst version of this story is the true one. And the people who knew that future best are the ones now standing in front of every camera that will point at them.
There is one more thing the family wants the public to understand before this video ends. They do not want Lynette to be remembered as a victim, even if the legal system eventually labels her one. They want her to be remembered as a person who lived more in 55 years than most people live in 80. A woman who chose adventure over comfort, the ocean over the suburbs, motion over standing still. A woman who, even in her last public post days before she disappeared, was joking about not going anywhere for a while. The irony of that caption now is almost too much to look at. But the spirit of it, the cheerfulness of it, the warmth of it is exactly how her family wants her name to be spoken from this point forward. Not in past tense. In gratitude.
Now let us hear directly from the people who actually do this kind of work for a living. The professionals who have spoken publicly about the Lynette Hooker case have not all said the same thing. But the consensus, in tone and direction, has been remarkably consistent across every interview that has been published since April. A forensic nurse interviewed by News Nation said something that should anchor the entire conversation about what comes next in this investigation. She said the correct timeline is the key to finding Lynette. Every minute discrepancy in the husband's account, she said, widens or narrows the search window for her remains in the Sea of Abaco. If she went over the side of the dinghy at 7:30, the tide and current models point one specific direction across the channel. If she went over earlier, or later, or somewhere different than the route he described, the search shifts dramatically across miles of water. That is exactly why investigators are spending so much energy on reconstructing the timeline, and so little of it on responding to headlines. The timeline is the case. Without the right timeline, divers are searching the wrong patch of ocean. With the right timeline, the math narrows to a few hundred square yards. A separate forensic expert told a national outlet something equally important about what investigators are doing on the seized soulmate. He said the Coast Guard is almost certainly looking, on board the yacht, for evidence of blood and signs of physical struggle. He named specific surfaces investigators tend to examine in cases like this one. The cabin floor and the seams between floorboards where liquid travels and pools out of sight. The galley counters and the inside of the sink drains where someone might wash hands or clothing after a struggle. The aft deck, the swim platform, and the boarding ladder where a body might have been moved over the side. The interior bulkheads and the cushioned berths where blood spatter can travel further than amateurs expect. The drains and the bilge below the floorboards, where the boat's own pumping system can carry trace evidence into low places. He noted, importantly, that water and bleach do not actually destroy blood evidence on a boat. They only displace it, dilute it, and thin it. They push it into seams, grout, and fiberglass joints, where modern presumptive tests can still light it up under a forensic blacklight. The exact phrase he used, in plain English, was that forensic investigators on boats are very, very good at this kind of work. They have decades of casework to draw from in marinas across the United States and the Caribbean. The charter captain Mo Monestime, who retraced the dinghy route for cameras, added context that no national headline has fully captured. He has spent 15 years driving boats through that exact channel between Hopetown and Aunt Pat's Bay. He said that if a person falls overboard and drowns in those waters, somebody will see them the next day in almost every case. He said again that he can see stingrays and turtles from the boat, so he would see a human body without any difficulty whatsoever. He also pointed out something almost no national outlet has emphasized about the local tidal patterns. A body drifting in those waters would, given the tidal patterns of early April, almost certainly end up on a beach within a day or two. Yet a flotation device did wash up on the shoreline, and a person did not. The boatyard security guard, Edward Smith, encountered the husband at 4 a.m. He gave perhaps the quietest piece of expert testimony in this entire case. He did not weigh in on guilt or innocence in any direct way. He did not call anyone a liar. He simply did the math out loud, on the spot, in front of the man telling the story to him. So I say, from 7, and you are just reaching shore now. The husband, by Smith's own recorded account, told him that the wind was blowing so strong, the boat had blown away from him in the dark. He said he could not really see anything once the moon was hidden. Smith called the police anyway, because that was his job. He waited with the husband at the boatyard until officers arrived shortly after 5 a.m. He did not, then or in any later interview, accuse anyone of any specific crime. He simply described what he saw, what he heard, and what did not seem to add up in his own years of working that property. That is what good witnesses do in any criminal case. They notice, and they remember, and they tell the truth when somebody finally asks them. Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles has been clear with NBC News repeatedly that the husband remains a suspect. The Coast Guard Investigative Service has stated in writing in its own press releases that this is an active criminal investigation. Prosecutors in the Bahamas declined to bring charges in April, only because the legal window had run out before the available evidence was ready. That decision is reviewable under Bahamian law. It is not permanent or binding on any future prosecution. If forensic results, witness testimony, or a future recovery of remains supports a charge, charges can absolutely still be brought. Charges can be brought in the Bahamas, where the alleged crime took place, under Bahamian jurisdiction. In scenarios involving American victims in federal maritime jurisdiction, charges could also be pursued through avenues in the United States. The agencies are coordinating, according to multiple sources who have spoken to national reporters. The clock is still running, and it has not yet expired on anything.
So is the silence, in the spaces where Lynette is not. Because while all of this paperwork moves between countries, Lynette herself is not in any of it. Lynette is somewhere in the water, or somewhere on a shoreline, or somewhere we have not yet looked. Lynette's mother is still calling reporters from Michigan, sending them folders of old text messages and photographs. Lynette's daughter is still sitting on the boat where her mother lived, talking to the ocean and to a camera and to anyone who will listen. Lynette's friends are still texting old conversation threads, the way you do when you cannot quite believe a person's name has gone silent. There is a particular grief that comes with not having a body to bury. You do not get the closure, and you do not get the goodbye, and you do not get the headstone. You get a date on a calendar and a missing chair at every holiday for the rest of your life.
Before we go into how you can help find her and what is likely coming next in this investigation, a quick word from today's sponsor. We will pick up the trail in just a moment, with the part of this case where the audience becomes part of the work. All right, back to the case, because this next part is where you come in directly. The Coast Guard Investigative Service has specifically asked for help on 3 concrete things from the public. First, they want to identify the owner of a particular sailboat that was moored near the Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay on April 4, 2026. They have publicly released 2 photographs of that unidentified sailboat through their social media accounts. Second, they want to hear from anyone who was sailing, fishing, swimming, or anchored in or around Aunt Pat's Bay on the evening of April 4th. Even something that seemed insignificant at the time could be the corner piece of a puzzle they cannot yet see. Third, they want photographs, video, and screenshots from the broader Hopetown and Marsh Harbor area on Easter weekend. Wind data, sunset photos, vessels in the background, party shots, anything time-stamped and geotagged. A single image with the correct seconds on it could rewrite the entire window of opportunity for the alleged crime. You can submit tips anonymously through the Coast Guard Investigative Service Tips application. It is available on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, listed simply as CGIS Tips. You do not need to give your name in any submission. You do not need to identify yourself by phone or email. You do not need to make a phone call to any office in any country. You can upload media directly through the application, and you can do it from anywhere with an internet connection. Federal investigators read every submission that comes through that application. If you have a memory or message this investigation should hear, please do not assume someone else has already said it. Cases like this are won and lost on the single tip that nobody bothered to send because they thought it was probably nothing important. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has its own tip channels for anyone with information specific to the Bahamas side of the investigation. National outlets, including major podcasts that have covered this case since April, have their own evidence intake emails for sources. If you have something concrete to share, share it more than once with more than one agency. Redundancy is how truth survives in a case that crosses 3 jurisdictions and an ocean.
Lynette has a mother who is still waiting for her daughter to come home. Lynette has a daughter who is still waiting for her mother to text her back about something normal. Lynette has a community in Onstead, Michigan that is still waiting for an answer to a question no one wants to ask out loud.
So where does this case go from here, in the weeks and months ahead? In the short term, 3 things are likely to develop, based on the trajectory of cases like this in the past. First, forensic results from the soulmate will begin to filter out. They will surface either through official statements or through controlled leaks to the reporters who have been on this story since April. If those results confirm signs of struggle or biological evidence inconsistent with an accidental fall, the legal posture of this case will change. A grand jury could be impaneled in either jurisdiction within weeks of any confirmed forensic finding. Second, the Coast Guard is likely to identify the owners of the mystery sailboat that was moored near the soulmate on the night of April 4th. Boats in the Bahamas, especially in tourist anchorages, are registered, photographed, and logged in marina records and customs paperwork. The agency is not asking the public because it is stuck without leads. It is asking the public because it wants to confirm and corroborate what it already strongly suspects from its own intelligence work. Third, the family is not going away from this story in any sense of the phrase. Carly Aylesworth has been on The Today Show, on NBC News, on Dateline, on Fox News, on every major platform she could reach since April. She has flown to the Bahamas in person to assist the search and meet with local authorities. She has sat in her mother's cabin on the soulmate before it was seized, just to feel close to her. She has spoken her mother's name into a camera over and over, refusing to let this case go quiet the way so many similar cases have gone quiet. In a Mother's Day video posted to her own social media accounts, she said it was the first Mother's Day she had ever spent without her mom. She said it was pretty hard right now to know that her mother was not a text away anymore. That sentence is the case in 7 simple words. Not a text away anymore. Her grandmother, Darlene Hamlet, is doing her own investigation, on her own time, from her own home. She has told reporters she has been combing through old text messages between herself and her daughter, going back years. She has been going through the couple's joint YouTube and Instagram accounts, identifying every location they stayed for long periods. She has been forwarding what she finds to the United States Coast Guard through official channels. She is, in her own description on camera, doing a lot of investigative work. A mother building a case for her missing daughter, one screenshot at a time, from a quiet town in Michigan. Volunteer detectives across the country are doing the same kind of work in parallel. The Lynette Hooker case has, over the past month, become one of the most discussed missing person stories on true crime social media in 2026. Maritime experts on YouTube have walked through the FLIR thermal imaging and propeller cutoffs typical of a sailboat like the soulmate. Their analysis casts serious doubt on the claim that visibility, wind, or a stalled engine could fully explain everything that happened that night. Bahamian residents have posted their own videos showing how clear, calm, and shallow the Sea of Abaco actually is, even on rough days. Friends and acquaintances of the couple are speaking out, some on the record by name, some anonymously through reporters who protect their sources. The wall of evidence is being assembled in real time, not just by police in 2 countries, but by an audience of strangers who refuse to look away. And the audience absolutely matters in a case like this. The only thing that ever cracks a case like this, with no body or confession or smoking gun, is sustained public pressure over time. Domestic violence homicides, especially the ones disguised as accidents at sea or in remote locations, used to disappear quietly into closed files. They do not anymore in the age of social media and federal tip applications. People who pay attention, who share posts, who submit tips are the reason quiet disappearance is no longer the default.
If you have ever wondered whether your attention matters in a case like this one, the honest answer is that it absolutely does. The Coast Guard does not put out public appeals for nothing. The press does not return week after week to a story without an audience that returns with it. The investigators on the Soulmate right now in Fort Pierce are doing that work in part because Lynette's name is still being said out loud by her family, by her friends, by her community, by you.
So what does all of this tell us, in the end, about the bigger picture beyond the case itself? It tells us that the picture on the social media feed is, sometimes, the most carefully edited part of a person's life. It tells us that domestic violence, when it ends in death, often disguises itself as bad weather, a freak accident, a tragic moment of bad luck. It tells us that nobody, including the people closest to a perpetrator, sees it coming until they suddenly see all of it at once, in retrospect. It tells us that the words a person uses in the 72 hours after a death matter enormously in any future investigation. That bounced is not the same word as fell, no matter how often it gets used. That monotone is not the same as broken, no matter what the speaker is trying to project. That sole focus is not the same as actually staying somewhere, no matter what a press release says. And it tells us that the ocean is wide, and the water keeps secrets. But it does not keep them forever in cases like this one. The Soulmate is in Fort Pierce, Florida, under the custody of federal investigators with experience in maritime homicide cases. The forensic teams are working, line by line, surface by surface. The grand jury, in whatever jurisdiction ultimately claims this case, is a real possibility now, in a way it was not in early April. Lynette's family is still talking publicly every single week, in interviews and on camera and online. The Coast Guard Investigative Service is still asking for tips from the public, week after week, through its own social media accounts. The audience is still watching, in numbers that grow every time a new detail surfaces. And somewhere in the channel between Hopetown and Aunt Pat's Bay, the answer is still waiting to be found by someone patient enough to look.
Lynette Ruth Hooker was a mother, a daughter, a sailor, and a photographer. She was a woman who called the ocean her happy place. On camera, on a video that is still online. She had a paid-off boat, a retirement plan, a family she loved, and decades of life ahead of her. She deserved to come home from dinner that night on April 4th. She did not come home. And the people who loved her are not going to stop asking why until someone gives them an answer they can finally believe.
If this case stayed with you, the way it has stayed with us through every update and every interview, drop a comment below this video. Tell us where you stand on the 8-hour drift across only 4 miles of channel. Tell us what you make of the Apple Watch that came home without its owner. Tell us if there is a detail nobody is talking about yet that you think investigators absolutely need to see. Hit that like button if you want more cases like this, broken down piece by piece, and subscribe for the weekly deep dives. We will be right here, in this same chair, when the next update breaks in this case.
Until then, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and remember one thing. The sea keeps secrets, but it does not keep them forever.